It's great to see everyone. I can see a number of names that I'm familiar with. Welcome, guys. But it's great to meet all the new names as well that have joined us recently. It's wonderful to have your participation here today. So there were a lot of questions that were raised through the platform. Of course, this, as Ben was saying, this is at the heart of what we were discussing when we decided that it would be great to hear a bit more of your voices. So what I will try to do as much as possible is to basically try to cluster everything, and we can have a bit of, just to help you raise more questions, perhaps reflect before you get to the challenge and share your ideas on how we're going to tackle these problems. So the issues that were raised, Leah, if you can skip to the next slide. The issues that were raised from the questions, as I see them, they can be summarized just more generally, that youth are not represented in the political space because there are long already established structures of power, and it's very difficult for a new entrant, for a young person to join. It was mentioned that there's lack of political parties that fully reflect the identity or the interest of young people. They are not being supported to develop the skills. What are the skills needed for someone to become a politician? There isn't a clear path for this. There is negative perception also of youth and their ability in making entry into politics that makes their entry into politics very difficult. However, but this is not the only problem, because it was highlighted also that we constantly highlight that youth are also not engaging enough in politics. And this is because of many issues, but what was raised through the questions is that there is, what I heard from the questions, that there is lack of trust in the political leadership and the institutions in place. And also governments and political parties approach youth in a non-inviting way. They're not as engaging. They don't really listen. They don't really engage as much as they should be. And there is impatience as well with the systems and the process, because things happen very slowly, and the politicians are not quick enough to react to the suggestions that have been made through different platforms. So I want to start by saying this is, of course, not a problem just limited to Africa and Europe, but this is a global problem. So according to the UN, and if you can go to the next slide, Leah. So first, of course, needless to say that the lack of participation and the representation is creating a gap, because it means that youth are not able to influence the decision-making process on issues that concern them as much as they should be. And this is really, as Ben said earlier, this is really at the heart of why we want to do these discussions and why we want your input on how to do it. So the UN says that there are 1.2 billion youth aged between 15 and 24 years globally. That makes them 16% of the global population. And this is very important, of course, because it means that youth are a very important part of the global population. But the average age of the parliamentarians at the moment is about 53 globally. And if you then, even though there is a possibility for youth to enter into parliamentary, as a candidate to parliamentary positions at the age of 25. If you then look at how many that are actually below the age of 30 globally, there are just 2.2%. And below the age of 40, we're just talking about 15%. So this is the global average. If you look, based on, but then let's look a little bit closer to the current situation in Africa and Europe. So if we start with Africa, based on the demographic importance of youth, as most of you will know, and Sam mentioned in the questions submitted, around 60% of Africa's population is under the age of 25. In some places, there was a question from South Sudan, for example, that 70%, and Uganda and many other places is much higher than that. So it is unquestionable that youth deserve a lot more opportunity in the political space. However, the Interparliamentary Union data report from 2018 shows that in Africa at the moment, the parliamentarians below the age of 30 is just 1.5% of total, with only then 15% below the age of 40, which is the same as the global average. I should add. If you look at Europe, the picture is slightly better. Actually, it's much better. It's considered to be the region that leads globally with youth representation, because if you compare it with, I'm not sure what happened there, but if you compare it there with the global average, 3.9% of parliamentarians are below the age of 30 and 23.5% below the age of 40. But of course, more can be done, more should be done. What is important that I want to highlight is that politicians in both continents actually do know this, and they do take this quite seriously. And there are efforts because of that, because it's seen as an important factor. There are efforts at national, regional, and continental levels to increase engagement. For example, the African Union has adopted in 2006 the African Youth Chapter, which has been signed already by 43 countries and has been ratified by 39. And within the Charter, Article 11 provides a clear guidance on how member states should be facilitating actively youth participation in the political space. Similarly, in 2018, the European Council also adopted a similar charter, a renewed EU youth strategy for 2019 and 2027. As many of you will know, there are also a number of cooperations happening between the two continental institutions in this area. But I want to actually say that youth participation in politics should not be seen as or measured just by the number of young politicians in a country or in the two continents. So, I mean, what would be the point if we have lots of youth in government, ministers, parliamentarians, but then the number of youth voting is really minimal still? Grace Camere, I don't think she's joined us today, pointed that young politicians, anyway, once elected, they do quickly follow in the footsteps of the older ones. So representation alone may not be the best way to ensure that the interest of youth is at the center of the government agenda. This is why it's a major concern that young people are not engaging enough in many of the other established forms of politics. At the moment, one of the major concerns is that young people are not engaging enough in many of the established form of politics, that is from membership of political parties to going out to vote during elections. But this is happening despite youth being at the center of many of the big debates, from climate change to many other global issues as well as national issues. And they're using creativity, innovation, their different skills to actually bring certain agenda of discussion at the center of political space. Social media and other digital methods, as you all know, have enabled them to do this. Youth are also drivers of some of the most important political movements and transitions, especially in the African continent. I'll just as an example, the 2011-2012 Arab States Popular Uprising was led by youth, as was the most recent 2018 popular protest in Sudan that ended the Omar al-Bashir's 30 years in power. Therefore, perhaps it's not entirely true that youth are not active in politics, but they are disengaged from the more traditional forms of participation. Why is it important to ensure that there is engagement? The issues that were raised as impediment, they're all very, very valid, but the point is that the engagement should happen in spite of those. Why is that? Because currently the involvement of youth in politics almost always remains informal, which means any change driven by youth is often done outside of the political channels. This has, of course, not been has been effective enough to drive many changes in many instances, but the outcome has always been that they are left behind in any establishment that is then created following the change. For example, despite achieving the unprecedented change that I mentioned earlier in Sudan, the youth engagement was not formalized in the new government that emerged. And currently, the only young person in the administration is the Minister of Youth. We spoke to a number of youth representatives while we were building this project, this platform, as Ben mentioned, and Max. I was lucky enough to be involved right from the beginning in this project. And during these field trips we conducted, many youth did express their impatience and the lack of trust in the system. It was very evident. But on the other hand, we were talking also to some of the people engaged in the policy space, and they expressed the challenge they face in gaining the confidence of young people. We were told that, for example, in Kenya, that the government is currently able to create 100,000 jobs per year, that is, but that there are 1 million young people entering the job market. So their inability to meet those numbers is creating a loss of confidence in the system among the Kenyan youth. So how do we change that? How do we actually create a space where we can think of solutions driven by you that can help be part of the change that we want to see? So it's important, therefore, to remember that even where there is goodwill, change is not happening overnight. We need to be a bit patient, but innovative as well, and thinking outside of the box. What can help? What can be integrated in the system that we currently have? Going back to the African context, most countries are still new democracies, and the political institutions are still in the process of being developed, as are the economic institutions, of course. And within the current structure, there is therefore lack of systems to enable youth to be part of the political process. So our Tunisian CFC representative, Monder, he highlighted in his question the prevalent lack of a pluralistic culture, which is resulting in systemic oppression of dissenting voices. This is sadly still the case in some countries, and the transition to a more pluralistic culture will inevitably take time. But I also want to add that there is often also a lack of understanding of the benefits that youth engagement can bring to policy and politics, which ties with the issue of hierarchy and culture highlighted by Narian Lincoln, I think, from Ghana. I once met a young African leader who explained that part of the challenge was indeed the perception of youth as less knowledgeable, but often also disruptive by the older generation. But she also added that this perception is usually tested very quickly when the people she has to deal with get the chance to talk to her and see that she does not have a disruptive nature per se, but that she's very engaged positively and wants to see change in the community, including among her peers, the youth population. She also told me that a big part of that, she has a big part of the job that she has to do, her and her colleagues, is to try and help key stakeholders in the country, especially in the policy world, improve their understanding and perception through this way. And they do this through constant dialogue and communication. And tying this to Matthew's question of what youth can bring to politics, that's definitely innovation, but also they, as I mentioned just now, but they can also help improve the way of thinking and how a significant part of the population is perceived. Beyond that, of course, young politicians are also probably able to connect and communicate with other young people within the country in a way that perhaps older generation politicians have not been able to do so far. But building an inclusive democratic institutions, the pluralistic culture that we want to see is a process, as I said earlier. It's not something that's going to happen overnight. What you should ask is, how can you contribute to that process? Because everyone has a role to play. So what is yours? What are the ideas that you're going to bring to answer the questions that you raised as well? Because don't make any mistake, there is clear understanding that youth are a significant, a very important dividend of any population, global, continental, and national level, including in our two continents. But while it is the responsibility of governments to frame those policies that are going to enable the condition to do this, to have an inclusive process, it's also important to have the proactive engagement of youth including through participation in the political systems and processes. Because anyone can have an impact, of course, in any political process. Businesses have a role to play, they have an influence, as do the civil society groups, the academics, the medias, and just ordinary citizens that go out to vote or pay taxes. So everyone is an important stakeholder, and that is how we need to start thinking, that there isn't actually a sector of a population that's more important than the other. And everyone can impact decisions and directions of politics and policies in their own different ways. You can look at discussions occurring in the media and social media, which help improve knowledge and understanding of the issues that are being discussed. The participation in elections through voting, being member of a trade union, running businesses and creating jobs, paying taxes. These are all forms that have an impact, that have influence in any government's everyday work. So to Tommaso's question of what is the right way to achieving results in representation, there is no single way, but many different ways through which you can influence outcomes, through which you can engage. So you always can start from your own area of expertise, your own area of interest. I don't want to keep way too long, everyone. So just very quickly for looking at just 3 very quick answers to questions that were raised. One was by Agnes, who pointed that many politicians benefit from the knowledge and skills of younger generation to win elections. Perhaps this is true. But also a very good example of influence and impact, because as well as how young people can learn from the world of politics. At the same time, we can see through this that this is something that they can bring, their knowledge through innovation, through new ideas, and a way of supporting political processes. And again, Matthew's question on prioritization, what should be a priority? I don't think there can be any one given priority when you have a political system to run. If you're a policymaker, this means that you cannot have the luxury of having one single priority, which is, I don't know, youth engagement or helping the economy and so on. There are lots of urgencies and priorities that need to be looked at concurrently. So because you can't we cannot focus on one thing and let everything else wait. So economic growth is an urgent priority, as is creating jobs for the young generation, the improving healthcare, education, and so on. organizing elections, ensuring that the democratic system is up and running, safeguarding peace, protecting rights, and so on and so forth. So what is important is that, but perhaps there are some countries that need to prioritize some things over the other, but it is really hard for a politician, whether young or old, irrespective of their age, to put things on hold and just say, this is the one thing that we need to prioritize.